When I opened my wife's jewelry box and saw the empty velvet indentation where her wedding ring should have been, I knew exactly what had happened. The ring that had never left Margaret's finger in 32 years of marriage, the ring she'd worn through chemotherapy and hospital stays, the ring I'd placed back on her hand one final time before the funeral. Gone. 3 days later, my daughter sat across from me at our kitchen table, fidgeting with her sleeves and avoiding eye contact. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom's ring only got me $500. I need more money for some stuff." I looked at my broken daughter and said quietly, "Keep it. You won't believe what I did next." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The morning Margaret died, I held her hand as the machines went silent. She'd fought lung cancer for 18 months, never complaining, always worrying about Sarah instead of herself. Her last coherent words were about our daughter. "Take care of Sarah," she'd whispered. "She's going to need help." I'd promised I would, not understanding then what kind of help she meant. When I opened my wife's jewelry box and saw the empty velvet indentation where her wedding ring should have been, I knew exactly what had happened. The ring that had never left Margaret's finger in 32 years of marriage. The ring she'd worn through chemotherapy and hospital stays. The ring I'd placed back on her hand one final time before the funeral. Gone. 3 days later, my daughter sat across from me at our kitchen table, fidgeting with her sleeves and avoiding eye contact. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom's ring only got me $500. I need more money for stuff." I looked at my broken daughter and said quietly, "Keep it." Then I opened my laptop and began typing. "Dear Detective Martinez, my daughter is..." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The morning Margaret died, I held her hand as the machines went silent. She'd fought lung cancer for 18 months, never complaining, always worrying about Sarah instead of herself. Her last coherent words were about our daughter. "Take care of Sarah," she'd whispered. "She's going to need help." I'd promised I would, not understanding then what kind of help she meant. The funeral was small. Margaret had requested simplicity. Sarah arrived 20 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors and speaking in that flat, distant voice that had become familiar over the past year. She hugged me briefly at the graveside, her body thin and brittle against mine, then disappeared immediately after the service. I assumed grief affected people differently. I didn't know she was already using. For 3 months, I lived alone in the house Margaret and I had shared for 2 decades. I kept her things exactly where she left them. Her coffee mug in the dishwasher, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her jewelry box on the dresser with everything arranged just as she'd organized it. The wedding ring sat in its designated spot, a simple gold band with 3 small diamonds that had cost me 2 months' salary in 1989. She'd loved it more for what it represented than what it was worth. Sarah called sporadically, always needing something. Rent money, grocery money, gas money. Small amounts that I transferred without question because Margaret had asked me to take care of her. $200 here, $300 there. Nothing that seemed unreasonable for a 28-year-old struggling to find steady work. She was living in a studio apartment downtown, supposedly looking for employment, supposedly getting her life together after dropping out of nursing school the previous year. I should have recognized the signs earlier. The weight loss, the erratic phone calls, the way her requests for money became more frequent and urgent. But I was drowning in my own grief, barely functional enough to maintain my job at the accounting firm, let alone diagnose addiction in someone I saw maybe twice a month. The first real warning came from Margaret's sister Linda. She called on a Tuesday evening in November, her voice tight with concern. "Walter, I saw Sarah downtown yesterday. She was with some rough-looking people near those apartments on 5th Street. She didn't look good, Walter. Really thin, kind of jumpy. I tried to talk to her, but she acted like she didn't want me to see her." I'd made excuses. Sarah was grieving. She'd lost weight from stress. The people Linda saw might not have been who she thought they were, but doubt started gnawing at me, especially when Sarah's calls became more desperate, more manipulative. "Dad, I got evicted. I need $800 for a new place or I'll be homeless." Dad, my car broke down and I'll lose my job if I can't get it fixed. Dad, I had some medical issues and the bills are killing me. Always urgent, always presented as temporary emergencies that a caring father would naturally want to solve. I transferred the money each time, telling myself I was honoring Margaret's final request. Taking care of Sarah meant keeping her housed, mobile, employed. It meant preventing her from falling into the kind of desperate situation where bad choices seem reasonable. By January, I'd given Sarah nearly $4,000 in emergency assistance. Nothing had improved. The crises kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. But I was still thinking in terms of normal problems: rent, utilities, transportation. I wasn't thinking about drugs. The jewelry box discovery happened on a Thursday morning in February. I was getting dressed for work when I noticed Margaret's dresser looked different. Nothing dramatic, just the subtle disorder that comes when someone has been searching through belongings. The jewelry box was closed, but not quite aligned the way Margaret always kept it. I opened it slowly, hoping I was wrong. The pearl earrings were still there, along with her mother's antique brooch and the necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. But the wedding ring was gone. The small velvet indentation where it had rested for 3 months since her funeral was empty, like a missing tooth in a smile. I sat heavily on the bed Margaret and I had shared, staring at the empty space where her most precious possession should have been. This wasn't a break-in. Nothing else was missing. No signs of forced entry. Only someone with a key could have entered our house undetected, and only 2 people had keys. My hands shook as I called Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later with the same result. By afternoon, I was calling every hour, leaving increasingly desperate messages. Sarah, please call me. We need to talk. Something's happened. She didn't return my calls for 3 days. On Sunday evening, she appeared at my front door without warning. She looked terrible, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with the grayish complexion I later learned was characteristic of prolonged drug use. Her clothes hung loose on her shrunken frame, and she couldn't stand still, shifting her weight constantly from foot to foot. "Hi, Dad," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside to let her pass, noting how she moved through the familiar house like she was casing it, her eyes scanning surfaces and doorways with predatory awareness. We sat at the kitchen table where Margaret and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped Sarah with homework through elementary and high school, where we'd celebrated birthdays and discussed family decisions. The normalcy of the setting made what I had to ask feel surreal. "Sarah," I began carefully, "your mother's wedding ring is missing from her jewelry box." Her response came too quickly, too rehearsed. "Missing? What do you mean missing? Maybe you moved it?" "I haven't touched anything in that box since the funeral. Nothing else is disturbed. Just the ring." She fidgeted with her sleeves, a nervous habit that had intensified over recent months. "Dad, I don't know anything about a ring. Why would I know about Mom's ring?" But she wouldn't look at me directly, and her voice carried the hollow quality of someone reciting lines they'd practiced. I tried a different approach. "Sarah, if you needed money, you could have asked me. You know I would help you with anything." Something cracked in her careful composure. Her shoulders sagged and her hands started trembling visibly. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Mom's ring only got me $500. The confession hit at me like a physical blow. Not the theft itself, I'd already known somehow that she'd taken it, but the casual way she reduced Margaret's most treasured possession to a dollar amount. $500 for something that had represented 32 years of marriage, something Margaret had worn through every significant moment of our life together. "I need more money for some stuff," she continued, still not meeting my eyes. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing Sarah's face, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman across from me had stolen her dead mother's wedding ring and sold it for drug money, then come to ask me for more cash to continue destroying herself. "Keep it," I said quietly. She blinked, confusion replacing the desperate calculation in her expression. "What?" "Keep the money. I'm not asking you to return it or pay it back." For the first time in the conversation, she looked directly at me, trying to process whether this was some kind of trap. You're not mad? I studied her face, the sunken cheeks, the dark circles, the hollow look that had replaced my daughter's bright smile. I'm not mad, Sarah. I'm heartbroken. She stood abruptly, as if the conversation had become too intense to bear. I should go. I didn't try to stop her. I watched through the kitchen window as she walked to her car, a vehicle I'd helped her buy 2 years earlier when she was still pretending to attend nursing school. She drove away without looking back, leaving me alone with the magnitude of what she'd revealed. That night, I sat in my home office with Margaret's photograph on the desk beside me, trying to understand how completely I'd failed to see what was happening to our daughter. The signs had been there for months, but I'd been too lost in grief to recognize them. I opened my laptop and began researching drug addiction, reading about the progression from prescription pills to street drugs, about the way addiction hijacked decision-making and moral reasoning. I learned about the desperation that could drive someone to steal from their own family, about the lies addicts told themselves and others to justify increasingly destructive behavior. By dawn, I understood that Sarah wasn't just struggling with grief or unemployment. She was trapped in a cycle of addiction that was systematically destroying everything meaningful in her life, including her connection to her mother's memory. I also understood that giving her money, no matter how well-intentioned, was enabling her self-destruction rather than helping her. Every dollar I transferred was another day she could avoid facing the reality of her situation. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. Take care of Sarah. But taking care of someone in active addiction didn't mean funding their habit. It meant finding a way to force them into treatment before they destroyed themselves completely. I picked up my phone and called the police. Detective Martinez arrived at my house Tuesday morning, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the weary patience of someone who'd handled countless family drug cases. I'd explained the situation over the phone, but she wanted to hear the details in person. Mr. Patterson, she said, settling into the chair Sarah had occupied 3 nights earlier. I need you to understand what we're dealing with here. Your daughter isn't just using drugs casually. Based on what you've described, the escalating financial demands, the theft of valuable items, the physical deterioration, she's probably heavily addicted to opioids, possibly heroin. The word hit me like a slap. Heroin. I'd been thinking in terms of pills, maybe cocaine, something manageable, treatable. Heroin was what happened to other people's children, not to the little girl who'd played piano recitals and earned good grades and wanted to become a nurse. The ring theft confirms that she's reached the point where addiction overrides everything else it made, Detective Martinez continued. Family loyalty, emotional attachment, basic moral reasoning. At this stage, intervention usually requires external pressure. She explained the options. I could file charges for theft, which would result in Sarah's arrest and possible jail time. Or I could work with them to set up what she called a therapeutic intervention, using the threat of prosecution to leverage treatment instead of punishment. The goal, she said, is to create consequences severe enough that treatment becomes preferable to continued using. We coordinate with treatment facilities to provide immediate placement when someone agrees to enter recovery. I thought about Margaret, about the promise I'd made to take care of our daughter. Jail wouldn't help Sarah get clean, but it might be the wake-up call that saved her life. What do I need to do? Detective Martinez pulled out a small notebook. First, we document everything. The theft, the pattern of financial manipulation, any evidence of drug use you've observed. Then we wait for her next contact, and there will be one. Addicts in her situation don't disappear permanently. They always come back for more money. She was right. Sarah called the following Thursday, her voice carrying the familiar, desperate edge that had become routine. Dad, I'm in trouble. I borrowed some money from the wrong people, and they're threatening me. I need $800 today or something bad is going to happen. I listened to her fabricated emergency with new understanding. The wrong people were her dealers. The borrowed money was drugs purchased on credit. The threat was real, but not in the way she was presenting it. Sarah, I said carefully, following Detective Martinez's script. I'm worried about you. You don't sound well. Why don't you come over and we can talk about getting you some help? I don't need help, Dad. I need money. This is serious. If it's that serious, maybe we should call the police. The line went quiet for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was sharp with panic. No police. This is family business. Just transfer the money like you always do. Come to the house, Sarah. We'll figure this out together. After she hung up, I called Detective Martinez. She's coming over tonight. She needs $800 for what she claims are dangerous people, but she doesn't want police involvement. Classic pattern, the detective confirmed. She owes her dealer, and she's using fear to manipulate you into paying her drug debt. We'll be ready. That evening, I sat in my living room waiting for Sarah to arrive, looking at the photographs on the mantel that chronicled our family's history. Sarah's first birthday, her high school graduation, her acceptance letter to nursing school. Pictures of a bright, ambitious young woman who'd somehow transformed into someone willing to steal her dead mother's wedding ring for drug money. She arrived at 8:30, more agitated than I'd ever seen her. She paced around my living room, unable to sit still, checking her phone constantly. Uh, Dad, I can't stay long. These people don't play games. I need the money tonight. I studied her appearance, noting details I'd learned to recognize from my research. The dilated pupils, the excessive sweating despite cool weather, the way her hands trembled when she tried to hold them still. Sarah, sit down. Let's talk about what's really happening. She perched on the edge of the couch, her body coiled like she was ready to run at any moment. There's nothing to talk about. I told you the situation. Either you help me or you don't. I've been doing some research about addiction, I said quietly, about opioid dependency and the way it affects decision making. Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. The ring money wasn't for rent or food. It was for drugs. The $800 you need tonight isn't for dangerous people who are threatening you. It's for dealers who won't extend your credit anymore. She stood abruptly, backing toward the door. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm not some junkie, Dad. I'm in legitimate trouble and I need help from my family. Sarah, you stole your mother's wedding ring and sold it for drug money. That's not legitimate trouble. That's addiction. Her composure cracked completely. She started crying, but not the way someone cries from sadness. These were desperate tears, the kind that come when all pretense has been stripped away. Dad, please. I know how it looks, but I can get clean on my own. I just need to get through this one crisis, and then I'll figure everything out. I'd read about this too, the bargaining phase where addicts promise future sobriety in exchange for present enablement. The lies they told themselves as much as they told others. Sarah, you can't get clean while you're still using, and I can't keep funding your habit while pretending I'm helping you. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her expression hardening. So you're just going to let something happen to me? Your own daughter? Before I could answer, Detective Martinez knocked on the front door. Sarah spun around, her face going white with terror. Dad, what did you do? I opened the door to let Detective Martinez inside. She was in plain clothes, carrying a manila folder, her demeanor professional but not threatening. Sarah Patterson, she said, showing her badge. I'm Detective Martinez. We need to talk. Sarah looked between us, understanding dawning in her expression. You called the police on me? I called someone who could actually help you, I replied. Detective Martinez sat at the kitchen table and gestured for Sarah to join her. Sarah, your father has reported the theft of valuable jewelry, specifically your mother's wedding ring. We have evidence placing you in the house on the day of the theft, and you've already admitted to selling it. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out a chair. Dad, how could you do this to me? Because I love you, I said simply, and watching you destroy yourself isn't love, it's enabling. Detective Martinez opened her folder and pulled out several documents. Sarah, you have two choices. I can arrest you now for theft, and you'll go through the criminal justice system, which typically involves jail time and a felony record. Or you can agree to enter treatment immediately, and we'll defer prosecution pending successful completion of a recovery program. The room went silent, except for Sarah's ragged breathing. She stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. Treatment? She whispered. 90-day residential program, Detective Martinez explained. Medical detox, counseling, life skills training. You'd be committed for the full period, no leaving early, no visitors for the first month, complete focus on recovery. Sarah looked at me with something that might have been hatred. You're forcing me into rehab? I'm offering you an alternative to jail. Detective Martinez corrected. The choice is yours, but it has to be made now. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing options that probably felt impossible. Finally, she spoke in a voice so small I could barely hear her. If I do the treatment thing, what happens to the charges? Complete the program, maintain sobriety for 1 year, and the charges disappear. Fail to complete treatment or get arrested again, and prosecution resumes. I watched my daughter weigh her future in real time. This was the moment Margaret had tried to prepare me for, though neither of us could have imagined the specifics. Taking care of Sarah meant making the hardest decision of my parenting life. The program starts tomorrow, Detective Martinez said gently. Transportation is arranged. Your father can visit after the first month if you choose to see him. Sarah looked at me one final time. Mom would hate this. She'd hate that you turned me over to strangers instead of helping me yourself. The accusation hurt because part of me worried it might be true. But I thought about the empty space in Margaret's jewelry box, about the way addiction had transformed our daughter into someone willing to steal her mother's most precious possession. Your mother asked me to take care of you, I said. This is how I take care of you. Detective Martinez stood, gathering her papers. Sarah, I need an answer. My daughter closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, treatment. The next morning, I drove Sarah to the treatment facility 2 hours north of our city. She sat in the passenger seat with a small suitcase staring out the window without speaking. The silence felt heavy with everything we couldn't say to each other. The facility looked more like a college campus than what I'd imagined for drug treatment, modern buildings surrounded by trees, with walking paths and outdoor seating areas. Nothing institutional or punitive about the environment. A counselor named Dr. Williams met us at the intake office. She was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of calm confidence that suggested extensive experience with situations like ours. Sarah, she said, shaking my daughter's hand, I know this feels overwhelming right now. Most people who come here are afraid and angry. That's completely normal. Sarah nodded without making eye contact. Dr. Williams turned to me. Mr. Patterson, the first month is crucial. Sarah needs to focus entirely on recovery without external distractions. That means no phone calls, no visits, no letters. It's difficult for families, but it's essential for breaking the psychological patterns that maintain addiction. I understood, but the thought of not knowing how Sarah was doing for an entire month felt unbearable. After that, Dr. Williams continued, we encourage family involvement, counseling sessions, education about addiction, learning how to rebuild healthy relationships. Recovery is a family process, not just an individual one. She walked us through the program structure, medical detox for the first week, individual and group counseling, life skills training, vocational rehabilitation. Sarah would be busy from dawn to evening with structured activities designed to replace drug use with healthier coping mechanisms. The success rate for court-ordered treatment is actually higher than voluntary admissions, Dr. Williams explained. External pressure removes the option of quitting when things get difficult. Sarah will have to work through problems instead of avoiding them. At the dormitory entrance, Sarah finally spoke. Dad, I'm scared. I hugged her, feeling how thin she'd become, how fragile she seemed despite her addiction-driven manipulations. I know, I said, but scared is better than dead. She pulled back, tears in her eyes. Do you really think Mom would approve of this? I thought about Margaret, about her final words asking me to take care of our daughter. I think your mother would want you alive and healthy more than anything else in the world. Sarah nodded, picked up her suitcase, and walked through doors I couldn't follow her beyond. The drive home was the longest 2 hours of my life. For the next month, I lived in a strange state of suspended animation. No frantic phone calls demanding money. No unexpected visits from my desperate daughter. No crises to solve or emergencies to fund. The silence felt simultaneously peaceful and terrifying. The first week was the hardest. I found myself checking my phone constantly, expecting crisis calls that never came. I'd wake up at night remembering Sarah's face when she realized I'd called the police. The look of betrayal that would probably haunt me forever. During those dark 3 a.m. moments, I questioned everything. Had I been too harsh? Could I have found another way? But then I'd walk past Margaret's dresser and see that empty jewelry box, and I'd remember what Dr. Williams had told me at intake. Mr. Patterson, addiction is a terminal illness. Without intervention, your daughter will either end up in prison or dead within 5 years. The statistics weren't optimistic, but they were better than the alternative of doing nothing. I used the time to educate myself about addiction and recovery. I attended support groups for families of addicts, learning that my experience wasn't unique. Other parents shared stories of theft, manipulation, and the agony of choosing tough love over enabling. I wasn't alone in having made decisions that felt like betrayal in service of long-term survival. A woman named Carol became my anchor in those meetings. Her son had stolen her car to trade for drugs, crashed it while high, and nearly killed a family of 4. I spent 3 years blaming myself, she told our group. 3 years thinking I should have tried harder to help him, given him more chances. Then he overdosed in my basement bathroom, and I realized all those chances I'd given him were just opportunities for him to kill himself slowly. Her son had survived the overdose, completed treatment, and been clean for 4 years. He was married now, working as a mechanic, and had recently made Carol a grandmother. The day I stopped helping him was the day I actually saved him, she said. It just took me a long time to understand the difference. I also began therapy with a counselor who specialized in addiction's impact on families. Dr. Reeves was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd lost his own daughter to addiction before dedicating his career to helping other families navigate the same impossible choices. Walter, he said during our third session, I need you to understand something crucial. Sarah didn't steal her mother's ring because she's a bad person. She stole it because addiction had hijacked the part of her brain responsible for moral reasoning. The Sarah who took that ring isn't the same person who played piano at church recitals. He explained how prolonged drug use literally rewired brain chemistry, making rational decision-making nearly impossible. Addicts don't choose drugs over family because they love their family less. They choose drugs because addiction has convinced their brain that they'll die without them. It's not a character flaw, it's a hijacked survival instinct. This helped me understand why my financial support had only made things worse. Every time I'd given Sarah money, I'd delayed the moment when she'd have to choose between drugs and basic survival. You were actually shielding her from the very consequences that might have motivated her to seek help earlier, Dr. Reeves explained. The hardest session came during my second week of counseling. Dr. Reeves asked me to write a letter to Margaret, explaining what I'd done and why. The exercise seemed pointless at first, but as I wrote, years of suppressed grief and guilt poured onto the paper. Margaret, I wrote, I don't know if I made the right choice about Sarah. She looked at me like I was betraying her, and maybe I was. But I couldn't watch her destroy herself anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that my money was helping her when it was really just helping her die more comfortably. You asked me to take care of her, and I failed for so long. I hope what I'm doing now counts as taking care of her, even if it doesn't feel like love. Dr. Reeves read the letter during our next session. Walter, what strikes me most is your focus on Sarah's immediate reaction rather than her long-term welfare. If your daughter had cancer, would you refuse chemotherapy because it would make her sick in the short term? Of course not. Addiction is also a potentially fatal disease. The treatment is painful, but the alternative is death. You chose painful treatment over comfortable dying. He helped me understand that taking care of Sarah had never meant preventing her from experiencing consequences. It meant ensuring those consequences led toward recovery rather than deeper destruction. You couldn't love her into sobriety, Dr. Reeves explained, but you could create conditions where sobriety became possible. During this month of waiting, I also started going through Sarah's childhood belongings, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. I found her high school journals, filled with typical teenage concerns about friends and grades and boys. Nothing suggested the trajectory that would follow. Her nursing school textbook sat on a shelf in her old bedroom, meticulously highlighted and annotated. She'd been a serious student, passionate about helping people heal. The irony wasn't lost on me that my daughter, who'd wanted to save lives, had nearly destroyed her own. I found photographs from her last normal Christmas 2 years earlier, before the addiction had fully taken hold. Sarah looked healthy then, bright-eyed and engaged. She'd brought homemade cookies and had played Margaret's favorite carols on the piano. Margaret was already sick by then, but she'd smiled throughout the evening, delighting in what turned out to be our last real family celebration. Looking at those photos, I could see subtle signs I'd missed at the time. Sarah was thinner than usual, and there was something manic about her cheerfulness. She'd insisted on cleaning the entire kitchen after dinner, working with frantic energy that I'd attributed to holiday excitement. Now I recognized it as early addiction behavior, the desperate need to appear normal while fighting internal chaos. The discovery that affected me most was a letter Sarah had written to Margaret during her mother's final illness. I found it tucked inside one of Margaret's books, apparently never given to her. The letter thanked Margaret for being patient during Sarah's difficult time and promised to get better so Margaret wouldn't worry. "I know you can see that something's wrong with me," Sarah had written. "I promise I'm going to fix it before it gets worse." The letter was dated 8 months before Margaret died, which meant Sarah had been aware of her addiction problem even then. She tried to hide it to protect her dying mother from additional worry, but she'd also recognized she needed help. The letter suggested she'd consider treatment, but hadn't known how to ask for it without admitting the full extent of her problem. This gave me some peace about my decision. Sarah had wanted to get clean, but hadn't been able to do it alone. My intervention had simply provided the external structure she'd been unable to create for herself. As the month progressed, I established new routines that didn't revolve around crisis management. I started cooking real meals instead of grabbing fast food between Sarah-related emergencies. I returned to reading, something I'd abandoned during the worst of Sarah's addiction. I even began socializing again, accepting dinner invitations I'd declined for months because I was always on call for the next disaster. Margaret's sister, Linda, noticed the change when she visited for Sunday dinner. "Walter," she said, "you look better than you have since Margaret died. More present, somehow." I told her about Sarah's treatment, about the decision to involve law enforcement. Linda was quiet for a long time before responding. "Margaret would be proud of you," she finally said. She worried about Sarah constantly toward the end, but she also worried about you. She was afraid you'd sacrifice everything trying to save Sarah and end up destroying yourself in the process. She never told me that. She didn't want to burden you with more worry, but she knew you were the kind of man who'd give away everything he had if he thought it would help his child. She loved that about you, but she also knew it could be dangerous in a situation like this. Linda's words helped me understand that I'd been honoring Margaret's wishes more than I'd realized. Taking care of Sarah meant preserving myself as well, ensuring I'd be available for her recovery rather than consumed by her addiction. "You couldn't love her into sobriety," the counselor explained, "but you could create conditions where sobriety became possible." After 4 weeks, Dr. Williams called to schedule a family session. "Sarah has completed detox and made good initial progress. She's ready to begin rebuilding family relationships. But there are some things you need to understand first." I drove to the treatment center with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Sarah looked better than she had in months. She'd gained weight. Her color was healthier, and her eyes had lost that hollow quality that had become so familiar. But she also looked angry. "Dad," she said when I entered the counseling room, "Dr. Williams says I need to apologize for things I did while I was using. But I'm still mad at you for calling the police." Dr. Williams intervened gently. "Sarah, can you explain why you're mad?" "Because he ambushed me. He didn't try to help me himself. He just turned me over to strangers." I started to defend my decision, but Dr. Williams raised her hand. "Mr. Patterson, let Sarah finish expressing her feelings. Then you can respond." Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "I know I stole Mom's ring. I know that was wrong. But I was desperate and scared, and you were my father. You were supposed to protect me, not have me arrested." The words stung because they contained elements of truth. I had felt like I was betraying her, even while knowing it was necessary. Sarah, I said carefully, I was protecting you, just not in the way you wanted to be protected. How is rehab protecting me? Dr. Williams leaned forward. Sarah, what would have happened if your father had given you the $800 that night? My daughter was quiet for a moment, then spoke reluctantly. I would have used it for drugs. And then what? I would have needed more money. And if he'd refused? Sarah's voice became smaller. I probably would have stolen something else. The conversation continued for an hour, with Dr. Williams guiding Sarah through the logical progression of where her addiction had been leading. Without intervention, she would have escalated to more serious crimes, overdosed, or died. Your father chose the hardest possible response, Dr. Williams explained. Not the easiest, not the most comfortable, but the one most likely to save your life. By the end of the session, Sarah's anger had transformed into something more complex. Not gratitude yet, but understanding. Dad, she said as we walked to the parking lot, I'm not ready to thank you for this, but I get why you did it. Over the next 2 months, I visited Sarah weekly for family counseling sessions. Slowly, we began rebuilding a relationship based on honesty rather than manipulation. She told me about the progression of her addiction, how it had started with prescription pain pills after a dental procedure and escalated to heroin when pills became too expensive. I told her about the months of worry, the way I'd enabled her habit without understanding what I was doing, the agony of choosing enforcement over enablement. The ring, she said during one session, I sold it to someone who didn't even know what it was. Just another piece of jewelry to them. I didn't think about what it meant to you and Mom until after I'd already done it. The loss still hurt, but it had become symbolic of something else the moment I'd finally recognized the depth of Sarah's problem and I found the courage to address it. 3 months after her admission, Sarah completed the residential program. She moved to a halfway house for continued support and began working at a local bookstore. She attended daily Narcotics Anonymous meetings and called me twice a week with updates on her progress. The charges were dropped after she completed 1 year of sobriety, just as Detective Martinez had promised. But more importantly, I got my daughter back. Not the same person she'd been before addiction, but someone stronger, more honest, and genuinely grateful for a second chance at life. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, Sarah and I visited her grave together. Sarah had saved money from her bookstore job to purchase a small floral arrangement. Mom, she said, kneeling beside the headstone, Dad kept his promise. He took care of me, even when I made it really hard for him to do that. Later, as we walked back to the car, Sarah stopped and turned to me. Dad, I know I can never really make up for selling Mom's ring, but I want you to know that calling the police that night was the most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. I thought about Margaret's final request, about the different ways love can express itself. Sometimes taking care of someone means giving them what they want. Sometimes it means giving them what they need, even when they hate you for it. Your mother would be proud of who you've become, I told Sarah, and she'd be proud that we found our way back to being family. 2 years later, Sarah moved into her own apartment. She'd been promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore and was taking night classes to finish her nursing degree. She visited me twice a month for dinner, and we talked honestly about the past without anger or blame. The empty space in Margaret's jewelry box remained unfilled, but it no longer represented loss. It reminded me that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of what someone has taken in order to help them find what they've lost. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.